hit me with anything and I'll talk about it.
All right. Sounds good. So this feels like it's an Agile thing about to start. My name is Matt Beam.
My name is Mike Markey.
I'm Jeff Singleton.
I'm Jim Benson.
Hello, Jim Benson. Thank you for joining us to talk about Obeya. This is awesome.
Good to be here.
Yeah. So we've got, as we mentioned, we've got a list of questions. I don't think we'll get to all of them, but I was curious about the overall sort of concept of an Obeya.
Okay.
Maybe, and actually, first, before we get into it, I think the audience knows me and they know Mike and they know Jeff, but I don't know if they know. Well, you're fairly well known, but I don't know if our audience knows. So.
Don't you know who I am?
Among smaller circles, yeah.
I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself and just tell us whatever you think is give us your story and how you got here, if that's okay.
Okay, the quick nickel tour of Jim Benson. I've been trying my best to lower this down. Started off as angry punk rocker in the middle of Nebraska in the 70s and 80s. That taught me lean very quickly because you had to learn how to build a market, build a product, get stuff done. Became an urban planner and civil engineer, built freeways and subways and things with giant, larger than 7 plus or minus 2 teams. Somehow we survived that without even email. So you can collaborate with groups. I'm living proof. Then started a software company in '99 with William Rowden, and we became kind of pioneers of Agile, starting off in XP with a pre-press copy of XP Explained from Kent. And while we were doing that, we were friends with David Anderson, and Dave at Microsoft and I at my little company were having the same problems, which was that Agile's response rate wasn't fast enough for our customers. And then ended up inventing Kanban and then writing the book Personal Kanban, which won a Shingo Award. And then most recently wrote the book that my editor makes me keep on the screen behind me, the collaboration equation. And that book is all about what we're going to talk about today, which is Obeyas, which is how do you visualize work and promote collaboration and constant alignment. And I've done these things now in all types of industries, including software. And they are, I believe, the next evolution so we had kind of like Agile, and then we had kind of Kanban, and there was like kind of like this, Kanban Agile wars, what's better? And it's like, just get your damn work done. so all Obeyas are about are just get your damn work done. So that's me in a nutshell. Oh, awesome. And I have a new album coming out in 2 months.
Really? Of music?
Yeah, music. And it's the most pretentious album possible. It is a ambient and Chapman stick album. I defy you to become more pretentious than
I might light a candle when I listen to it. Would that
Is it still called an album? Do they still do albums, or is it?
I'm 58 years old. It's an album.
Is it now just collections of
vinyl's coming back.
Download? Like what's the current lingo? What do they call it?
Yeah, things are still actually called albums.
Okay.
Technically a record album, I think, Jim.
Yes, a record album. When we went to launch this, I asked my colleague John, the stick player, I said, should we just release this track by track? And he says, no, things still work better if you release them as a coherent unit, which made me happy as a person who lived through albums.
So, just real quick before we get started, is Obeya Gemba is a Japanese word that means where the work happens, right? Is Obeya similar? Like, does it mean like where we visualize the work or something?
Yeah, and it's translated as many different things, but actually that's the best way. This is where we visualize our work. This is what I say is that it's a place where all the information that a team needs to get their work done resides.
Okay, so there's one place to have that conversation.
Yep. Or those conversations.
Yeah.
If it was that conversation, then Kanban would be enough. But Kanban is never enough.
That's an interesting distinction.
Yeah. Just like a dashboard isn't enough. and you shouldn't have just a Kanban, and you shouldn't have just a dashboard. There's like different types of work require different conversations and different visualizations.
So that leads naturally to a question of what kinds of information should be there and what sort of conversations should it set up. I'm guessing you'll say something like it depends because you just talked about all the different contexts that you've done this. But are there any commonalities in terms of?
Totally. It is the information that your team needs to act with confidence. So that's going to be what's happening right now. What work do we have planned? How does our work deviate from what we've planned? If we have problems, how are we in the process of solving them? Not, hey, Randy, go solve that problem, which is what we usually do. Like, dude, you take it. And then dude goes off and hides in a corner and then comes back and says, oh, I did this random stuff. So how are we dealing with complexity? How are we planning? How are we, what is the culture that we want to build? And is do our processes and our visualizations help underwrite that culture? So one of my favorites was in Plant 5 of the GE large appliance division in Louisville, Kentucky. And on the campus of GE there, they had several different buildings, and each building built a different thing. So you had kind of like your dryer building and your dishwasher building. And Plant 5 was the double door, bottom drawer, French door fridges. Huh. Yeah, I have one. I had two at one point when I had a vacation house, and they're kind of like the best selling thing that they did in the later years. And you would go to each plant, which had its own CEO, its own way of working, and each plant was different. Like you had your super militaristic plant, you had your chaos plant, and blah 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 blah. And Plant 5, there was a woman who was the CEO there that everybody really liked. And they had a big room called the Blue Room, which was their Obeya. And in there was everything. There was sales information. There was defect information. There was shipping, cost of delay information. Everything was in this room. And I would sit in there and be amazed that all day long, different line workers, just people who were out there building the fridges, would come in, and they wouldn't just walk around the room. They would go to like their favorite thing, and they would
thing they were
study
interested in,
that they were ridiculously interested in. And then that had a direct relationship to how the level of camaraderie on the shop floor, the speed at which they onboarded. And I have a bunch of stories about the plant, but suffice it to say that the culture there was incredibly different, not just because of transparency, but because of the trust, saying, we're trusting you with this sensitive information to be able to, just as line workers, take that information and turn it into some sort of positive action. I was blown away by what I saw there.
Hey, Jim, a quick question on that. What do you think? Kind of a chicken and the egg thing. Did the culture come first, and that's why the Obeya worked, or did the Obeya help force or forge a different culture?
So there it is. So we have struggled with that a lot. So several years ago, Tony Ann and I are on the senior faculty at the Lean Enterprise Institute. And for a long time, a guy named John Shook was the head of LEI. And he's a wonderful guy. And he and I were working one day, actually in Louisville, and he and I went out to lunch, and he said, we've been doing this work for so long. We make like we make good progress in a plant or in a place, change some lives, and then there's a management change, and then everything goes away. Exactly what we recognize in Agile. That happens all the time, right?
Yeah.
So the funny thing about it is like all continuous improvement is the same. Lean is Agile. Agile is Six Sigma. Six Sigma is Prince 2. Prince 2 is whatever. It's all of these things are just all of us trying to find like the best ways to work. And so when we talk about that chicken egg of what is leadership, what are the tools that we use, what is the mindset, I find that actually it doesn't matter where you come into the system. It is easier when boss says, this is the kind of change we're going to do. But if boss says that, you then put yourself in a situation where your system's super brittle because next boss can say, screw that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So how do we build systems that are resilient enough to withstand regime change?
Hmm.
Right.
So,
So
I'm guessing they would have to be effective enough and demonstrably. You have to demonstrate that they're effective enough so that it doesn't make sense to roll back that change. Is that sort of?
that's part of it. Is to demonstrate the efficacy of the system that you've set up, but the other thing is to make it so tightly coupled with culture that it can't go away. So we talk a lot about culture, but no one ever sits down and says, how do we directly instantiate the culture that we want to see?
Totally.
So before we build any Obeya, we go through something that we call a right environment exercise. And a right environment exercise is, do the people in your group have what they need to do a professional job? What we say is, can they act with confidence? And so we get together initially and we'll do kind of this value stream mapping exercise, but we do it in what we might call it an agile way. So we take that lean tool and we do it in an agile way, which is to say that we do map out the flow of work, but around that flow of work, we say like, where do things upset you? Where do you have bad relationships? Where, so we start to look for where the actual emotional issues are in that flow of work. And then we start to remove those. And what we found, especially in knowledge work, is that when you remove those emotional issues, you actually are removing the major bottlenecks for the group getting their work done. You don't have to go in there and say, what's your cost of delay and what's the tax time of this and stuff like that. It's like, okay, thanks for your metrics. We can measure that if you want, if that makes you feel better. But really everyone already knows where the problems are because it's where they're pissed off.
Yeah.
And so we start there. And then after we get these people to recognize that humans are doing the work and that they're the humans, not just tell me what to do or put it in my backlog or whatever.
Yeah.
Then we say, okay, we're going to go through a little exercise where we do 4 different exercises, and they basically trick people into betraying the culture that they want to be in. And so we say like, okay, what is the purpose of the work that you're doing? Who does it benefit? How does it benefit them? Et cetera. Then we say like, okay, when something happens, when do you need to be informed? Like personally. So not just like, I want to know when there's changes in this or that, but it's like, I consider myself the database expert. And if you touch the schema and you don't talk to me, then I'm going to get all upset.
Yep.
Right. So we start to figure out what those boundaries are for people and when we need to talk to each other. And this is important in software. Sorry, software people, but by and large in software, we don't have a large collection of highly skilled people at interpersonal communication.
This may be a pattern I may have observed.
Maybe.
But they're all people who actually do care about the work that they're doing.
Yes.
And so we want to make sure that we're building a system that allows them to know when to act appropriately to care for the people that they work with, for the stuff that they're producing, and for their own careers. So we go through this exercise, and it basically sets up, okay, this is how we want to work. Then we do something that freaks people out. We say like, okay, right now, what are all the tools that you use to exchange information? So imagine any team sitting down and doing that. And so what happens when we do that exercise is we usually get at least a dozen, and sometimes as many as 4 dozen different tools that people are using to confuse the living crap out of themselves.
Yeah.
And so you'll get there, and like we've literally run into teams that were using WhatsApp and Slack and Discord and Teams to chat.
Yeah. So the number of potential communication paths is sort of exponentially
Right.
exploding. Yeah.
So then just imagine like you've got those things, and then your team is constantly making decisions, but you've never been communicating very well. So then most of your communications become various forms of WTF. Where the is this, what the is this, why the is this, and
catch up.
So basically the team spends almost all of its time undoing its own confusion. So we set up a communications plan that says this information goes here, this information goes here, this information goes here. And then you set up kind of that social contract around that. And you say, okay, we're going to cut your number of tools from 22 to 6. And then you still got 6 tools, which is plenty easy for you to get lost in. So then in your Obeya, when you're working on things, you will have direct links to the Google Doc, the Jira ticket, and whatever else that surrounds this particular problem that you're trying to solve. So everyone in the group knows the problems that are being solved, the stuff that's being worked on, and where the artifacts are for those things to go to. When those things happen, then we find that people actually use the Obeya because they've created an Obeya that matches their culture and gives them direct return on investment, which then actually allows them to actually be agile or be lean or, be Susie and the Banshees or whoever they want to be. So that's a very long answer to a very short question.
No, that's good. That's good.
Yeah. So you're basically inventory. I don't want to say basically, but it sounds like you're doing an inventory of all the things that the team needs to communicate about, clarifying how exactly and where they can have that communication, simplifying it.
Yep.
And then that and all of the agile behavior that we're trying to instantiate is downstream of that.
Yeah, it's so we're actually building the culture of continuous improvement instead of wishing that it happens.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's almost subversive because you're almost tricking them into seeing where the dysfunction is. Like there's a piece of information that person A puts into a Jira ticket as a comment. Somebody else is communicating via email. There's the team stuff, and what you'll find in a lot of these cultures, I'm guessing, is a delay or a response of delay around change. Like anything that goes wrong, you've got the people who are reacting immediately, and then you've got a bunch of other people who kind of come along a few days later after the problem has already been addressed and want to know what the heck's going on with this problem, and they just drag everyone right back into the swamp.
Yep. And so the having everything in one place maintains that consistent alignment. What did we decide in this meeting? Where is our work flowing? What weird are we seeing? That it's an alignment generator. And especially now that most of the teams are remote or semi-remote, it's very easy to fall out of alignment very, very quickly. So it's also interesting because, having walked through all of these different paths that we have with Tony and me, we've been able to see, the blessings and the curses of the lean stuff, the agile stuff, the Kanban stuff, whatever you want to call it. All of these things come with like practices first. Right. And so you tell people like, I want you to do 2-week iterations. And they're like, why? I want you to do an A3. And they're like, why? And the thing is that you don't need any of those things every day. So you pretty quickly do them poorly because they're not part of your daily routine. So when we're able to visualize that work in real time and constantly, we're constantly able to level set to say, what is the toolkit that this team needs right now? So I will tell you, like you guys know that like I'm a pretty strong bitchy person about Scrum in general, But at Modus, we will frequently fall into situations where you're doing 1 or 2 week iterations or whatever, because the work at that time calls for it.
Right. It's the
And then at
appropriate
other
tool.
times we require a flow-based system, and at other times we require kind of a hybrid of the two.
So
So
kind
and
of
so
scrum as needed.
So yeah. Don't tell Schwaber, but yeah, Scrum is needed.
I'm
Well,
guessing
it's a very pragmatic approach. You're gonna apply the right tool to the most effective tool to the situation.
So I just came from a 2-day symposium, the people at work symposium that LEI, Shingo Institute, and a bunch of other people threw. And when we started planning that, one of the goals was to bring together all of these communities. And we didn't do we did 2 things. One, we scheduled it like the day before Agile 2024.
Yeah.
But the other thing is we didn't do a very good job of marketing that to the Agile community. But the goal of the event was to do exactly what we're talking about. Can we, now that the Agile industrial complex has collapsed and the lean industrial complex has collapsed, can we get out of our own way?
Can we get to the point?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we just like figure out ways to work?
I'm guessing you must see the same anti-pattern we just talked about with Scrum and with a bunch of stuff, like with Obeya as well. You must see people being like, okay, now Obeya is the thing, and they put a bunch of stuff in one place, and they haven't thought through communication, and this follows the same failure path, right? Where they haven't thought through, why are we doing this? How is it appropriate? How is it useful?
Yep.
Yeah.
It's like, have you bought the gym membership? Or did you go off and buy the workout clothes before buying the gym membership? Or did you buy a gym membership and then say, no, I don't need a coach. I can just come in and work out on my own.
Yeah.
So one of the things about all of the work that we do is that we're doing it with human beings. Human beings don't think about this stuff. And even when the 4 of us are under pressure, we stop thinking about this stuff. So teams will need some sort of person or people there that just geek out on these things to keep them in check. But once they're up, then they can live. As they say on CBC up in Canada, the following will be voice augmented video.
Awesome.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen here.
Sure.
And there we go. This picture here, and I am showing a picture of a board on a wall that has several columns and several swim lanes, and it is tracking the estimation for the MEP, which is mechanical engineering and plumbing, for a series of buildings at Turner Construction in New York City. I'm now going to go and go up here and say, this is how it started. It started looking like this, and this is a board that basically looks like a normal kind of Kanban board with like Post-it notes in blocks. But what happened with this particular visualization was a couple of things. One is these 2 young women, Amanda and Savannah, were in the engineering group there. And they decided that they needed an Obeya, that they needed a Kanban initially. And so they went in and built it out of Post-it notes in this small room. And it was Amanda and Savannah's board. Because the room was small, people would come in and they'd rub against the wall and they'd leave with a bunch of their data on their butts. Right?
Leakage.
So then they changed it, and they changed it to whiteboard marker, and then people would come in and erase it with their butts. And so the version that's up here now is actually with wet erase marker. So the board itself went through several iterations of continuous improvement.
But resistant data.
But here's like a couple key things about this. Number one is that Amanda and Savannah were super young women in a very old man dominated company. And they were in a group, the estimation group, which is literally like projects would come in and these people would be responsible for saying, how much is it going to cost to build this 40-story billion-dollar plus building, and then they have to go and they have to like figure out how all of the tile and all of the toilet paper rolls and everything else, how much all of that stuff put together is going to cost. And that's the initial version of this. This is like the what we used to call in engineering the planning level estimate. And so you usually give this to one estimator. And so what would happen is all of these people had their individual work, but they were called the estimation team. Right? And then they would do their work, and then they would do their work, and then they would do their work, and they would be bored. They would have great bowling nights, but they were a crappy team. So then when they put this board up, each one of the swim lanes, there are 7 swim lanes on this board. A couple of things about them is they have main groups. So one is estimating duties, one is head estimator milestones, one is RFIs, one is MEP constraints, and one is comments. Those big areas have a lot of little columns in them that are all different depending on the project. So there's major work that is very predictable, and then there's project specific work that is project specific. So in each of these, you can barely see it here because it's all redacted because it was like super sensitive information. But what happened was they put this board up, and then they brought everybody in for a huddle every morning, and they talked about each of the rows or each of their projects for like just a few minutes. And when they have these things called constraints, and constraints are basically things that they're confused by, or things that are slowing them down. And what they found was that there was a huge overlap between their projects about the different constraints that people were finding. And all of a sudden they were able to share learning. So then they started talking too much. So how many people have been in a stand-up meeting where you talk too much? So they said, well, we're talking too much for the huddle, but this is important information. So they set up a parking lot over here. When things got long or somebody said this will be long, they wrote them down there, and then they did a lean coffee after it. And whoever was available would stick around and do the lean coffee, and they would go through the parking lot topics. What they found almost immediately was that the accuracy of their estimates went way up, but their job satisfaction shot through the roof because they weren't so isolated anymore. So then on the other side of them, might talk about them later, was the procurement department. And they're the people that take those estimates and then actually go off and buy things. And those groups never talked to each other. So as soon as that group got happy, they're like, we should talk to them more.
I'll have what they're having.
That's right. And so they started going through this thing called stitching, where they started to figure out ways that those two groups could collaborate better. And so the reason I'm saying that is because these were very, very initially disempowered people who brought in a set of practices that allowed that work to happen, that collaboration to happen. But they weren't necessarily relying on a dictate from high above. They had the blessing of from above, but it wasn't a dictate, a mandate, or anything else. And when they left the group, the board stayed up.
And is that because the teams felt like, hey, this was actually pretty darn useful and it made us happy, and so that's fine?
It was largely because Amanda and Savannah are awesome and they're not jerks. So the first thing that they did was they said, we don't run the huddle and we don't run the lean coffee. And they would frequently find reasons to leave the office.
To get out of the way.
So they made sure that the team as a whole owned what was up there. And of course, their biggest metric that things were successful was that when they would come back from leaving the office, things would change on the board. Like they would change the structure of the boards, which is one of the reasons that I don't like using online tools because it's a lot harder psychologically to change the structure, the workflow structure of something like Jira than it is things on a whiteboard.
Yeah.
That's something that I noticed over the years, is that, we would take an electronic tool to take over a physical job. And that electronic tool theoretically made it easier for us to edit, change,
Mhm.
modify. And yet there was this it was almost like no one wanted to. They would look at it and say, no, it's been written down. I can't change it. It's in a locked form now. And now we're stuck with it. We have to
Mhm.
keep using it that way. It always struck me as like this incredible dichotomy, or this it just didn't make sense. It was always like backwards. It was like the more electronic it was, the more rigid it became.
So one of the things about all electronic tools is they have a format, right?
Mhm.
They have a structure, and that structure does not allow you to do this. Go on, you. I'm going to share my screen again and do augmented.
Awesome.
If there's
We'll
one
take
thing
it.
you're going to get from visual guy, it's
It's
visual
visuals.
stuff. Okay,
That's right.
so okay, so this is our faculty Obeya. And so this is the Obeya that we use at Modus Institute to track all of the work done by all of the people who are working at Modus Institute right now. And there's a lot of stuff in here. But one of the most important things that I will note about this, and incidentally, just for like any of you who can see this, and I'll just say for other people, it's really long. This is our value stream at Modus Institute.
Mhm.
It's really long. Your work is way more complicated than you give it credit for. And then that screws you every day
Because you
because
can't tell where to have conversations about what in the context.
or you don't know what to improve.
Yeah.
Mm.
So all of these orange stickies down here are things that we need to improve. I mean, look at that. But what I want to show you here is we're starting to build out our standard work about a variety of things. And I believe if I zoom in on this right now, so one of the things that we want is when a student goes through Modus Institute, we want to make sure that they're supported as they go through the process. So, hey, did you get a welcome email? Have you talked to us on site? As you go through, if you're studying for like a month and then you disappear, do you get a thing back? And so one of the things you can't do in most other tools, which is why we use Miro, is put stuff on other stuff.
Mm.
Mhm.
So if this was a Jira ticket, all you'd see is make email stuff.
Right.
And then you have to click into it and go through this list of extremely structured, boring notes. And so here, like right now, at any point in time, I can say, like Dave Pryor is a bozo. And then when Dave Pryor comes in to the thing to do
Dave.
something next time, he's going to say, "Hey, I'm a bozo." He's going to know,
Mhm.
and he's going to know also because I made it orange, and orange is kind of like our flag that says, hey, you should pay attention to this. So
You should
that's why
act
down
on
here,
this.
these are the things we need to pay attention to right now.
Yeah, one of the questions I had at some point was the use of the online infinite canvas thing, and my sense was it makes it, because I've used it, it makes stuff easier just for the reason you're saying. Like, you have to, if you're using a tool, you have to be able to understand not only how to navigate, you have to keep the structure of how the tool expects you to use it, and then also the context of the meaning of whatever it is you're actually trying to talk about. So it's like more work for the human brain. We know that the human brain is designed to minimize the number of calories burned, right? And so like it just won't, it'll throw out stuff that you would think you would need, but
I believe it's called the STFU gene.
Yeah. I read this book one time. It was called How to Pitch Anything. And they were talking about, I can't remember the author's name, but he was talking about how you have to understand, if you're talking to somebody, everything that you say goes through the sort of brainstem filter, right? Because when you say something to somebody, their lower level brain is thinking, can I eat this thing? Can I reproduce with it? Is it going to kill me? Right. And if it doesn't get through any of those filters, you're not going to get to the forebrain where you've got the complicated thing that you're trying to get them to think about. Like they're hungry. They're thinking about something else.
That's why there's a million donut shops and Agile is dying.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the underlying lesson is simplify, right? Like ruthlessly drive out all of this complication that doesn't serve you. Is that fair?
Well, and so so in the image that I just showed, I mean, one of the things about Miro is you will find that the moment that you start using it, it will instantly become a ridiculously painful pile of crap. The half-life of coherence in a Miro board can be measured in seconds. So you
Yeah.
have to be very, very dedicated to keeping the board as clean as the board that I just showed.
Yeah.
And trust me, we had all of COVID to learn this. Like, I could show you earlier boards where Tony Ann would kill me, like, oh my God, don't show them that board. But Miro's biggest failing, obviously, is that the information in it has no permanence and no processing capability. So, the value of, Kanban flow or Kanbanize or Jira or any of these other tools is that they do actually allow you to measure some things and then do stuff with it. My problem is I have literally I shouldn't say that. In the absence of Troy McGinnis, I have never seen a team really make good use of their data.
Say that again. Say or expand on that.
Right. So teams will gather the data that they're supposed to, so they can gather like worthwhile data. Like I'm still opinionated. I'm lovable but opinionated.
Love
so
it.
you can gather useful information like cycle time and throughput and things like that, like actual physical information, or you can get your vanity metrics like velocity.
Yeah.
But none of those things actually allow you to make any decisions whatsoever. Not even defect rate allows you to make any decisions whatsoever in the absence of understanding the narrative of your whole product.
The why.
Do you know why you're building it, who you're building it for, how it makes the world a better place? Do you know who's coming onto your team, how quickly they can be onboarded? When they come in and they have trouble being onboarded, where are they confused? Because that's usually also a bottleneck
Yeah.
or a political snafu or whatever. Do you understand from soup to nuts what you're building and why, and then how your work is flowing, where there are relationship issues there, where there's communications issues there, and when there's really actually honest production issues. And so all of the tools that we have right now manage production issues.
Because that's
But
what matters. That's the outcome. That's the point of the whole thing.
well, yeah. So, but it's like talking about how good. Oh my God, Tony's gonna kill me. It's like measuring how good your meal is by what happens when you go to the bathroom. All right. You actually need to taste and savor your damn food. So I can make you all extremely productive by coming in and making your lives absolute hell. I mean, just go work for Elon for a couple of days. But if you actually want a good working environment, you're going to have something like the original Zappos, where you have like a Tony Hsieh who's like really concerned about your welfare. And then everyone else in turn is really concerned about their welfare. One of the crazy things about Turner Construction, this is like a 112-year-old construction company, is that they have a concept there they call active caring in a freaking construction company in New York.
Yeah. What does that mean?
And that means you care about the people you're working for, the people you're working with, the people who are working for you, the end user of the building, the regulators that are coming to bug you. That you actively care about making a good outcome for all of those stakeholders. And it was such a crazy environment that I never expected. I really expected just nothing but a big pile of toxic masculinity there, and it was just a joy to work there.
So there's a rabbit hole we could go down about how caring for humans changes as AI comes in and more of the work gets done by robots and less gets done by humans. Maybe actually you'd still have humans, they'd just be doing different work, so maybe it doesn't change at all, actually. I don't know if that's useful. But
Interestingly enough, so 15 years ago or 20 years ago, this was the big conversation in Lean, because robots were going to do everybody's work. They haven't. They do a lot of work, but they haven't done their work, all of the work. And my friend John and I are building a humane AI class for Modus Institute. And one of the things that we have noticed is two main things for me is that number one is that AI tools are they're improving all the time, but they're written by people who actually don't understand their customers.
Mm,
So you can use AI right now for a variety of things that remove like 80%, or we'll just say at the moment 60% of the really annoying, stupid things that you didn't want to do to begin with.
right.
But the remaining 40%. So let's just say in a Kinevin world, that it's doing your simple and moderately
Right.
complicated tasks.
Right.
And then you as a human still need to do the really complicated and complex stuff. And you usually have to do it with other people. So
'Cause-
the agile take on this is that what's left over is almost all pairing, mobbing, ensembling. It's the stuff that we wanted to do from the beginning, but we couldn't get away from handing work for other people. Now, if you can just say, write me Python script to do this, and it says okay, and then it's a Python script, and they say, no, fix it like this, and then it says, okay, here's someone slightly better. And it's like, do this, and it's like, oh wow, it's it's good now. So that's now 15 seconds or 2 minutes that you spent doing something you would spent 2 hours on, and now that complex task that we all ignored before, we can all actually work on. So like imagine if that little kernel of code was open for the people at Boeing to work on, and then the flap thing never happened and we never drove planes into the ocean. So that's my take on AI. Is it's gonna clear out the easy stuff so that we can do the hard stuff.
We will always need creativity, judgment, meaning, all of this stuff, right? And that's so human beings will never be disintermediated, is what I hear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. And when William and I were hiring coders at Gray Hill years ago, we were platform agnostic because this was like 99 through 2009, when like every month a new language came out. It was like this explosion. And so people would come to us and they'd have all these Microsoft certs, and we're like, that's great. Have you ever solved a problem? And they're like, well, blah, 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 blah. I've Microsoft certs. And I was like, yeah, go away. And then other people would show up and they'd say like, I coded in Fortran once when I was like 8. And I'd say, great. Have you ever solved a problem? They say, yeah, we did all this stuff and blah, 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 blah. It's like, you are hired. Because while no one probably wants to hear this, anyone can learn how to code.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the coder,
Why to
the
code?
coders are like real coders to me are interested in like, how the hell can I do this?
Yeah.
And that's something, that novel stuff is something that AI can help you with, but it's definitely not something that it's going to do.
Yeah, I've said to software developers, actually developing software is not really the job. And that typically leads to a conversation like solving the problem is the job. Software is probably a pretty good guess for the tool that we'll need, but don't get those twisted. Yeah.
Every line of code you write is a liability.
Yes, it's not an asset. It has to be maintained. Yes. You're not done.
The Jim Benson quote is, software being done is like lawn being mowed.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Jim, you took us through you said all of this stuff that you need to make a decision needs to be in the Obeya, and that's all. This feels like a lot of stuff. Are there any patterns that you see with teams or individuals or companies putting in stuff that doesn't belong? Is there a class of things that people tend to lump in that isn't helpful? Or is it really kind of put stuff in there and then you can figure out what's useful and just so the other stuff will fall away?
Well, I would definitely say use the right tool for the job. So I've seen people try and write documents together in Miro. And you're like, what? No.
Just use Word with the collaboration feature.
No matter what you think of Google, they have solved that problem for you. I think one of the other things is, in the instance that I showed before, there were different functional areas in that Obeya. So there was a standard work area, active planning area, recent work area. There was a trash area, operations, design guides, podcast planning. So we figured out kind of what the major things that we needed to know are in there. But, there's podcast planning. Well, we don't have the blog posts for those podcasts in the system. One of the other things is so because Miro is, and maybe this will change, but Miro does not allow any containerization of anything. Literally, the moment that it does, it will become the killer app of all killer apps. So if I could drop a Kanbanize or a Kanban flow or a Kanban tool instance into that board, then we're rocking. If I can drop a live Google Doc, which I think I can actually, I think I can do that into there. But
Because then
the
you could
moment,
dip down into that workflow or that complexity of that app, the way that app works without losing the context. Is that what you mean?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And so what I see is I see people trying to make this board do more than it can. The other thing is I see people become very attached to things that go into an Obeya, and then they don't ever archive them or throw them away. And so then after a while, that becomes part of the unfunctional clutter. So what we did was we created to recognize that this was a problem and to note that it would always be a problem. We created a trash area in ours, and then we just shrink things down to like microfiche level.
Oh, okay.
And we put them in that area so that you still have it, but it doesn't create the functional clutter. So my major thing for Obeya is just always is that what we're trying to overcome, what we're trying to do here is build a system that allows us to actually create a working model of the stuff that Daniel Kahneman talked about in Thinking Fast and Slow. So human beings tend to rapidly solve problems because not rapidly solving problems is an unknown quantity. We don't know how much time it's going to take. We don't have a system to put us into that system two thinking. So what we want out of our Obeya is triggers to say, this is weird and we need to think about it. Right. And then your group builds standard work then that says, okay, when we find something that's weird, so in the Cynefin framework, it would be in the unknown, like center area, and the confused area. And you say, like, we don't know what this is yet. Okay, what is our standard work for dealing with something in that case? Do we talk about it in the stand-up meeting? Do we toss it into a special Slack channel? What is it that we do with that? And then when we find something and we say, okay, we believe that this is very complicated or we believe it's complex, then what do we do? What is our protocol for mobbing? So Scrum teams don't mob across the board because they've all taken on too much work over the course of their sprint already. And there's literally no space in them to change any other way of working than to hand stuff to other people. It is the fundamental failing of time boxing.
Yeah.
And so the question is then, even if you're a Scrum team, can we agree that when we find work like that we need to be honest about it and act in it in an honest way, and that will definitely impact our immediate sprint goals, but it will improve the overall project significantly. Does that make sense?
Yeah. There's nothing inherently in the Scrum guide that would cause that. It's just sort of, this is more of a question. It's just how human beings tend to work. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Okay.
I will keep going back to XP, but in both XP and Scrum, the idea is that we want to have a coherent amount of work that we've all agreed to do, and then we want to do that coherent amount of work. What I see happen frequently is that coherent amount of work is incoherent. We grab a bunch of stuff that will fit rather than a bunch of stuff that creates a narrative. So over the course of a sprint, if you said this sprint, we are all collaborating on getting this thing done,
Our sprint
and then
goal.
we've chosen the features or the user stories that match that. Awesome. If it's like we picked 15 random pieces of crap to do, you're going to get that level of clarity out the other end. um,
To revisit the metaphor. Why is that
yeah,
so hard, Jim? Why is it so hard to start with a goal and then pick work that would satisfy the goal as opposed to just, hey, here's the
because
stuff that people told? I guess is it because we're just taking orders? Is that what it is?
yeah. So the way that Agile has, we went from being short order cooks because other people came and gave us work to becoming short order cooks because we gave ourselves work. And what we haven't described in the Agile community very well is how does our team actually be a team? Not are we protected from other teams, which is in itself a dysfunction. But does our team actually have the coherence? Do we actually understand what we're doing? And the moment that you run into, I would say, more than one dependency in a sprint, you already know that your team is fake. You don't have a real team. And then number two, your work doesn't have coherence, because all a dependency is work that's been misplanned because it falls into multiple teams and those multiple teams aren't coordinated. So all of these things come back to one thing, which is like, as a group, and this is what I loved about COVID. Coders that previously were saying, just tell me what to do during COVID, all of a sudden said, why am I doing this? And all of a sudden, all of these coders were like, can I be part of the planning for this up front? And we're like, yeah, dude, because that's what Agile was supposed to be. It wasn't supposed to be a product owner coming and handing you a bunch of crap.
Totally.
Yeah, that whole customer proxy thing was so toxic. I'm so glad that it's leaving.
Well, it's a translation layer that's got it's obviously going to be lossy, right? Like, how can it be as clear? So
It's a
it sounds like
translation layer with a person who never has any institutional power. No product owner ever has any institutional power to do anything at all.
yeah.
Well, because the ones who do don't have the time to be in that role.
Yeah, because they're actually vice presidents and they don't know it.
Yeah.
So this has been fantastic. Time check. We're almost done with the hour. Mike, Jeff, do you have any questions that still lingering?
Oh man, I have so many questions. First and foremost, I've been plugged into LEI for a very long time, and so I recognize your name, and so it was really a joy to talk to you. But I have a number of questions, and we're not going to tackle this question here, but maybe if you come back or something, we can talk about it. But you spoke earlier about the collapse of the Agile industrial complex, and before that, the collapse of the lean industrial complex.
Yep.
Yeah, lived through both of those. And so this next, whatever it is, whatever you call it, and you kind of talked about, okay, how do we, become the phoenix and rise from the ashes? How do you prevent the collapse of that next thing? Because that's the whole thing.
So when we started Kanban, like one of the first conferences that we had in Belgium in Kanban, the talk that I gave was Scrum sucks, Kanban will suck too, and it's all your fault. And one of the most potent things was when I was in college, I was reading this interview with Abraham Maslow. And somebody said, hey, Dr. Maslow, you're leading the industry and, all these different theories that you have. So like in 100 years, do you think people will still be referring to your work? And he said, I certainly hope not. So what Coriolanus used to say was, he was like, every model is flawed and will be replaced by a new model.
Yeah.
Kanban is a new model that we're working with. It won't work. We just haven't found the conditions in which it won't work yet. Oh. And the other thing that I always loved that Corey says is continuous improvement is about replacing something that sucks with something that sucks slightly less. Yes. Okay. So it is total hubris for any of us, even Jim Womack or John Shook or Taiichi Ono, or any of us sitting on this call, to think that we're going to invent a thing that isn't going that
So,
isn't going to, you know, no,
Is it
who
gonna
would have
blow
thought
up or
that Mary Lou
fail at some
Retton
point?
would ever be supplanted as the greatest gymnast in the
mhm.
world? And now look what we've got. We've got like an entire U.S. team of people that would destroy Mary Lou Retton.
Yeah. Yeah, look at the
So,
look at the F1 pit stop in 1955 versus today.
Mhm.
It doesn't look
Oh,
like
yeah.
it's the same thing.
so that's what so that's the whole thing is like, so we want to visualize work because we know that that's the next step. But I don't know what the next step is after that. But what I do know is I want to keep stepping.
Hmm.
You know,
Awesome.
I was never bought into Kanban enough that I don't want Post-it notes on my freaking tombstone.
You know that
Here
you're
was
gonna
Jim
get 'em.
Benson. Jim Benson's lying here now. Who knows what comes next? You know,
So
the
don't put
personal
flowers
Kanban
on Jim
for-
Benson's game.
Oh
Put
shit! That's
sticky
what's
notes.
going to happen now. I can see
Yeah.
it.
That's awesome.
Oh God.
All right. Well, that feels like a good place to end it, Jim. This has been awesome. Thank you so
Are you
much.
saying this has been
It feels
an
like
Agile thing?
It feels like it's been an Agile thing. I think I've been Matt Beam. Yes.
Oh, well, I've been Mike Markey.
I'm still Jeff Singleton,
And
Oh, I'm
that.
Jim.
and you're Jim Benson.
and you're still Jim.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jim. Thanks again for coming, and get the book. What's the book called, Jim?
And get the book.
Get the book.
We'll put up a link. We'll put up a link for the book with the title and
Awesome.
everything.
Collaboration equation. Gotcha.
Yeah. Thank you guys. Like I guess I got home at like midnight last night, so this ended up being a very pleasurable way to be surprised. Oh crap, that's this morning.
That's awesome. Thank you again. I'm going to press stop.
Thank you.